History is filled with kings, emperors, warriors, and philosophers. But hidden between the pages of ancient chronicles are the stories that were never meant to be celebrated. Stories kept quiet, stories whispered, stories so disturbing that scribes wrote about them not to glorify but to warn. And tonight, we explore one of those stories. A story that takes us back over 2,150 years into the heart of the Han Dynasty, where one wealthy merchant built a life of prosperity on the surface, while hiding something far darker behind closed doors. This man, Liu Pengle, lived during the reign of Emperor Jing of Han between 157 and 141 BCE, and according to ancient historical texts, he may be the earliest documented serial killer in human history. Before Jack the Ripper, before H.H. Holmes, before the concept of serial killer even existed, there was Liu Pengle. Tonight, we uncover his story in full. To understand how Liu Pengle operated, we must first step into his world. The year was around 150 BCE, a time when the Han Dynasty was growing rapidly after decades of conflict. The empire had survived the rebellion of the Seven States in 154 BCE, a massive uprising that threatened imperial stability. After the revolt was crushed, China entered a period of reconstruction. Trade routes expanded, markets grew, cities became busier, and for the first time in Chinese history, the merchant class, traditionally viewed as low status, began accumulating real wealth. This was the environment that allowed men like Liu Pengle to rise. He was not born poor. He was not an outsider. Liu Pengle appears in records as a well-off trader, operating in an era when money could open doors that birth status alone couldn't. Merchants moved goods across provinces, bought and sold livestock, managed large estates, and often employed dozens of servants, porters, and laborers. And in a world without identity papers, police records, or centralized registries, this created a loophole, a blind spot, that predators could exploit. Workers could travel miles from home, accept employment under a wealthy household, and if they disappeared, few people would ever know. This was the world Liu Pengle stepped into, a world where the vulnerable could vanish quietly. Liu Pengle was born sometime between 180 and 170 BCE, just before Emperor Jing took the throne. He grew into adulthood during a period when wealth was more powerful than reputation. Ancient descriptions portray him as charismatic and smart, someone who could read people, negotiate skillfully, and present himself as a respectable, reliable figure. He knew how to charm officials. He knew how to win trust. By the time he reached his 30s, around 150-148 BCE, his home had become a bustling estate. Servants cooked for him, managed his property, cared for his animals, and handled daily chores. He also hired laborers, usually young men from rural areas who came to the city to make money. People admired him. He dressed well. He spoke politely. He dealt fairly with those above him. What no one knew was that beneath that facade, something chilling was unfolding. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Workers arrived. Workers left. That was normal in 2nd century BCE China. But as the years passed, especially between 150 and 146 BCE, the number of workers associated with Liu Pengle's estate increased dramatically. Servants came and went with unusual frequency. Market vendors noticed they rarely saw the same set of faces returning to purchase food or supplies. Families who sent members to work for him never heard from them again. Still, this was a time without written employment records. People assumed the workers had left, found better jobs, returned home, or simply wandered elsewhere. And Liu Pengle encouraged these assumptions. He had an explanation for every disappearance. He went back to his village. He ran away. He stopped showing up. He found work with a friend. His answers were always calm, always believable, always delivered with confidence. And confidence, in a world without forensic science, often passed as truth. The first cracks in the illusion came from the people who lived closest to his estate. Neighbors occasionally heard uneasy noises from inside the compound. Arguments, commotion, sudden silences. Vendors noticed the servants they interacted with seemed frightened. overly obedient, even withdrawn. A cart driver who regularly transported goods described Liu Pengel's staff as tight-eyed and tense, always glancing toward the main house as if afraid of being watched. Still, nothing was concrete. Rumors aren't evidence. In Han Dynasty China, accusing a wealthy man without proof could be dangerous. So people kept quiet. The whispers spread only in the background. But fate would eventually bring someone forward. Around 148–146 BCE, a young man entered Liu Pengel's household as a new servant. He expected hard work. Most estates demanded long days for small pay. But almost immediately, he sensed something was wrong. Rooms were locked without explanation. Certain areas were forbidden. Servants rarely spoke, and when they did, it was in hushed, nervous tones. New workers entered, but he never saw any of them a second time. He described hearing noises at night, footsteps, dragging sounds, sudden thuds followed by silence. The tension was unbearable. After only a very short time, he ran away, risking punishment, risking being labeled a runaway laborer, because he feared something far worse inside the walls. He reported his suspicions to a minor official, and that simple act cracked open the case. The official who heard the report didn't act immediately. In a time when false accusations could lead to punishment for the accuser, he needed caution. But the account lingered in his mind. Over the next year, he quietly questioned vendors who delivered food, neighbors who lived beside the estate, labor brokers who supplied servants, travelers who had seen the household. The results were disturbing. Not one person could confirm seeing former workers alive elsewhere. Not one servant who entered the household was ever seen leaving. And no one could identify where the dozens of workers ended up. By 146 BCE, the collection of testimonies became too large to ignore. So the official brought his concerns to his superior. A quiet investigation, one not announced publicly, was approved. Officials tracked what they could, though the era lacked the tools of modern investigation. Still, the pattern was undeniable. Between 146 and 144 BCE, the case grew stronger. The whispers turned into reports. The reports turned into consensus. Something was seriously wrong inside the home of Liu Pengel. Finally, around 144–143 BCE, officials were granted permission to enter the estate. This was not a simple search. In the Han Dynasty, searching the home of a wealthy merchant required formal approval. But when authorities finally stepped inside the compound, they discovered what ancient texts carefully described as evidence of many lives lost within the property. The surviving records, written in coded and moralizing language typical of the era, make it clear multiple servants and laborers were killed over a period of years. The number has been lost to history, but the pattern of behavior fits what modern criminology would recognize immediately. This was serial killing. Not random violence, not a single impulsive act, but repeated systematic exploitation of vulnerable people. And it had gone on for years. Liu Pengel was arrested soon after the discovery. He denied everything. He claimed the testimonies were lies. He said jealous rivals wanted to ruin him. He insisted the workers had abandoned their posts. But his answers didn't match the evidence. Officials questioned the remaining servants, who finally spoke under protection. Their statements confirmed the disappearances. The authorities, after reviewing the testimonies and findings, reached a conclusion unprecedented in ancient history. Liu Pengel intentionally took the lives of multiple servants over a prolonged period. And because the Han Dynasty was strict, especially with crimes involving multiple deaths, his sentence was inevitable: execution. By 143 BCE, he was put to death under imperial authority. Just like that, the life of a man who had once been respected and admired came to an abrupt end. So why does this case matter? Why does this man, living over 2,100 years ago, deserve attention today? Because his case, documented in historical records, might be the earliest pattern of serial killing ever acknowledged by a government. Long before criminology existed, long before psychological profiling, long before the term serial killer was ever invented, Liu Pengel displayed all the traits: a controlled environment, repeated killings, careful victim selection, a veneer of respectability, years of undetected crimes. His story challenges a deeply held assumption that serial killing is a modern phenomenon, but the truth is darker. The capacity for such actions has existed as long as humans have existed. Liu Pengel is simply one of the first to be caught and recorded. His case opens a haunting thought. If this is the oldest documented case, how many earlier killers operated in total darkness, long before writing or record-keeping? How many stories were never told at all? Today, Liu Pengel's name is unknown to most of the world. He isn't taught in schools. He isn't featured in documentaries. His story is tucked into the edges of ancient Chinese law books, mentioned only briefly. But now, more than 2,100 years later, we can finally see his case for what it was: the earliest known serial killer in recorded history. A man who used wealth as a mask, a man who exploited one of the oldest weaknesses in human society: poverty and vulnerability. A man whose actions remind us that the darkest parts of humanity are not new, and not isolated to any time or place. And so I'll leave you with a question. Do you believe evil like this is born, or created by the world around it? I'd love to hear your thoughts.